Breaking news out of the NFL, where the league office is appealing Deshaun Watson's 6-game suspension. The Players Association will now have 2 days to respond to that appeal. Deshaun Watson suspended those 6 games for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy. Commissioner Roger Goodell will now determine who will hear the NFL's appeal of Deshaun Watson's suspension. Let's welcome in NFL insider Jonathan Jones here. JJ, we were waiting to see if the NFL was going to indeed appeal the suspension. And in fact, they are. What's the latest?
Well, the latest is that, yes, they are going to file that appeal. They have notified the NFLPA that they are going to do that the NFLPA has until Friday to respond to that appeal. Really a procedural thing, not anything that anyone paying close attention to this as a fan needs to really concern themselves with. The concern really, and the main question that you're going to have, that many people have, is, okay, how long is this appeal process going to last? I've talked with sources both in the NFL League office and with the NFLPA. Both have told me there is no timetable for that. And so because of that, what we have is in the CBA, it is, hey, it can be expedited. The process will be an expedited process, but really that's all that we have in terms of timing. I can tell you the vibe has been, certainly from the league office perspective, that they would love to have this all sewn up before the start of the NFL season. Folks at the Cleveland Browns would also like that. I'm told Deshaun Watson's camp, of course, would like that as well. And so what can the league do upon this appeal? Well, Roger Goodell can hear it, or he can appoint his designee, as you mentioned, Amanda. And that person can increase, modify, perhaps even reduce that 6-game suspension. That's in there. No one is expecting a reduction in this 6-game suspension. And so that's what we're faced with right now, as the NFL has filed that appeal with Deshaun Watson's 6-game suspension.
So, JJ, I mean, people weren't really sure. I mean, initially, a lot of people thought it was going to be a year, and then we heard closer and closer to the decision that it was going to be about 6 games or so. It wasn't going to be that full year length. And as you mentioned, it could potentially be reduced. Nobody is expecting that. They are expecting games to be added on to this, or to ask to be added on. How many games potentially now could we be looking at? Are you hearing any sort of number?
No, I'm not hearing any number. This is unprecedented, Amanda, in any number of ways. Judge Sue Robinson, in her report, the 16-page report, essentially talked about how the NFL said that this was unprecedented. She said that this was egregious behavior that she hadn't seen in the NFL in terms of other cases that she had looked at as it related to sexual assault. And so it's hard to say, because this is also a new process with the CBA that was signed in March of 2020. This is the first time that it's gone to the arbiter first, and then the NFL can appeal. Back in the day, of course, the sort of process was flipped, where it was the NFL heard it, and Roger Goodell heard it, handed down his punishment, and if the player didn't like it, it would then go to appeal. You mentioned adding games. I think a number of folks would say, all right, add 2 games, and maybe it's 8. I think that right now that is maybe the thought process that's going on. I will say that the NFL had been pushing for an indefinite suspension of Deshaun Watson of at least 1 year. That would mean that he would not play for the Cleveland Browns in 2022, and that in the offseason he would have to apply for reinstatement. Roger Goodell would hear that reinstatement application and then determine whether he would then be able to play in 2023. The other part that is possible here is that a fine is involved, that you don't necessarily add games, but that there is a fine that is involved. We know that there was no fine with Deshaun Watson, that his 6 game checks, if the suspension were to hold, would be stripped from him, but with a base salary of just over $1 million, you're talking about a third of $1 million at that point, a little more than $300,000. And so that is also a possibility here. So it's really hard right now to prognosticate what exactly is the NFL going to do, especially because we don't yet know if Roger Goodell, the commissioner, is going to hear that, or if he is going to appoint someone to hear this appeal.
So we initially had Judge Sue Robinson there, and I know you touched on it at the top, but because it is a little murky, walk us through who could potentially be hearing this appeal.
That's a great question. It could be Roger Goodell or someone he appoints, but because this is such an unprecedented situation, no one really knows who that appointee would be. One could assume it would be someone who would be favorable to the NFL, because in this process they got a third-party arbiter who, according to the NFLPA and Deshaun Watson, felt that Judge Sue Robinson was down the line. And so we don't have those names just yet of who it could be, but obviously who it would be if it's Goodell or someone else who sort of has a track record with the league, then we could sort of make determinations based off that.
JJ, when this initial suspension came out, there was a lot of reaction to it, many of it negative, many people feeling like it should have been more games. How much pressure is on the NFL, even if it is a third party who is going to look at this, potentially adding more games? I mean, how much pressure is it there to make sure this looks right? I don't really know how to frame that, but I think you understand what I'm saying.
I totally understand what you're saying. And right now, the NFL, they are faced with two issues. First of all, the NFL has the power. They have the hammer. If they want to fix any short-term issue, they can do so in the short term. They have to consider the long term. They do have to consider precedent here. And so if the NFL wants to appeal this and give Deshaun Watson the year-long indefinite suspension, they have the right, according to the collective bargaining agreement, to do that. If that were to happen, I would imagine that Deshaun Watson and his legal representation would then file in federal court, but that could take some time. So, we're sort of getting off into the woods on that and a little step ahead. But your question about the sort of line that the NFL has to toe here, where if they want to be perceived as, quote unquote, being tough on crime and they care about women, for example, well, this 6-game suspension is far shorter than what the NFL was hoping to get with this potential punishment. But meanwhile, what you have here is a neutral third party who heard the facts of the case as they were presented. Everyone had their day in court, had 3 days in that hearing a couple of months ago. And so now what you're going to be faced with is showing people that, oh, no, we don't like that ruling that was by a neutral third party. We're now going to throw it into our own kangaroo court. And I believe that players, agents, representation, they would view it as that, and I believe that because that's what they have told me over the past couple of days. Does the league actually care about that? I don't know, and they may, but if in the long term you're worried about how the players are going to perceive the league, that, hey, we, again, had a neutral third party hear this out, according to our own collective bargaining agreement, this was the punishment, let it lie, but instead you then use your power, and again, the players agreed to this, but then you use your power to get whatever you wanted, and it sort of never mattered in the first place. That long-term is not at all going to sit well, and frankly, it could set a bad precedent for NFL punishment against its players and against its owners moving forward.
Jonathan Jones, thank you so much there. I know you're going to be working the phones and talking to a lot of people on this as this just continues to move along in this process. JJ out there at Broncos training camp, CBS Sports HQ. We're going around the country. Make sure to tune in tomorrow for the Bengals. Let's check in on Joe Burrow, see how they're doing, and Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs Thursday.
We're following breaking news out of the NFL where the league office appealing Deshaun Watson's 6-game suspension. The Players Association now has 2 days to respond to that appeal. Now, Watson suspended for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy. Commissioner Roger Goodell will determine who hears the NFL's appeal of Watson's suspension. And for more on this, let's bring in two-time Super Bowl champion Bryant McFadden, one of our NFL analysts here at CBS Sports HQ. B-Mac, your reaction to the news that the NFL is appealing the Watson suspension?
Jeremy, I'm not surprised. And the reason why I'm not surprised is because, when we all initially heard 6 games was handed down to Deshaun Watson, I, for one, felt like, wow, that was best case scenario based on some of the other incidents that we've seen in years past, similar to what Deshaun Watson has currently been involved in. And with the NFL, they probably felt the same way, like 6 games a bit easy for him. Now they have the opportunity to go back and probably hit him with something harsher than the 6 games that we initially heard. So me personally, I'm not surprised. This is far from over because this could be a lengthy experience when you talk about the NFL appealing and then waiting for the NFL PA to respond to the NFL in their appeal in regards to representing Deshaun Watson. So the PA will get involved with this situation. Of course, we already heard the NFL, they will appeal and probably hit him with something harsher than 6 games. So this could be a lengthy, ongoing affair regarding Deshaun Watson and when he potentially can rejoin his team in the Cleveland Browns throughout the season.
B-Mac, you've won 2 Super Bowls, so you know what kind of team you need to have in order to win an NFL championship. Now, the Browns are built to win an NFL championship. The one thing that was missing was perceived as the quarterback. Now they have that, but now it looks like he is going to be held hostage by this legal situation moving forward. If you're in that room and you're one of his teammates and you know that this team is Super Bowl ready, I mean, what are you thinking at this point in terms of seeing this whole situation evolve the way it has?
I mean, right now you got to prepare for life without Deshaun Watson until otherwise. So if you're on the offensive side, if you're on the defensive side, Jacoby Brissett is our guy. It's our job, collectively speaking, to get him prepared to be the best Jacoby Brissett he can potentially be this season until Deshaun Watson is notified he can return and get right back with us in the locker room and put his hand in the pile to try to hoist a sticky Lombardi. This is the situation. So until notified otherwise, you got to go out and say Jacoby is our guy. Jacoby may be the guy for the entire year. We don't know. But one thing we do know, Deshaun Watson will miss some games. We don't know the exact number, but he will miss some games. So now, throughout training camp, throughout every meeting, throughout every opportunity, try to prepare Jacoby for a long ride, potentially, because that could be the case.
B-Mac, if you're the Browns and you've said you're going to go with the 6 games with Jacoby Brissett, now it could be longer, could be shorter, but more than likely it could be longer. Who knows what the NFL is going to decide, who's going to hear this, and what's going to happen in terms of that. If you're the Browns now, are you looking at possibly making a move to bring in somebody like a Jimmy Garoppolo who's looking for a new home?
It depends on the situation. I think right now they're doing a great job, the staff, in analyzing their the quarterbacks they have on the roster, the depth, the lack thereof. Now knowing that Deshaun Watson is going to be suspended some ball games. Right now it's 6. That's the minimum. It's 6 games. Now you get an opportunity to see Jacoby, how he's looking, taking reps with the ones, running out there in situational moments throughout practices, how he's handling those opportunities. If he's looking like he's ready to go, there's no need to address bringing in another experienced guy like Jimmy Garoppolo. But if there are some heels, if there are some issues where he's not looking as comfortable as you thought he would look, then you have an opportunity to really dissect and see, does it make sense? But nothing would happen, Jeremy, until the final suspension is handed out to Deshaun Watson. Because if it's 6 games, it doesn't make sense to bring in Jimmy Garoppolo. Heck, if it's 8 or 10 games, it doesn't make sense. But let's say, hypothetically speaking, the NFL comes out and says he gets a full year. Now you have to really go back and dissect the opportunities at the quarterback position, especially if Jacoby Brissett is not looking his best. But if he's doing what he's supposed to do, you ride with the troops. They're already in the locker room, and Jacoby has to be your guy.
2-time Super Bowl champion Bryant McFadden joining us to talk about the NFL appealing the Deshaun Watson suspension. Thanks for hopping on, B-Mac, on short notice. Of course, this is an evolving story, an evolving situation. If you want to hear more about it, certainly they'll be going deeper into it on All Things Covered, B-Mac's podcast with Patrick Peterson. You can download and follow wherever you get your podcast audio. You can also watch the pod on YouTube.
Breaking news out of the NFL, the latest step in the Deshaun Watson case. The league is officially appealing Deshaun Watson's 6-game suspension. That suspension handed down just a few days ago by Judge Sue Robinson. Now the Players Association will have 2 days to respond to that appeal. Deshaun Watson suspended those 6 games for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy. 24 cases filed against him in civil court. All but 1 have been settled as of right now. Commissioner Roger Goodell will determine who exactly will hear the NFL's appeal of Deshaun Watson's suspension. Let's welcome in our Josina Anderson here, who has been on the phone nonstop with this news. What is the latest when it comes to this appeal? What do we need to know?
Well, that the NFL is fully exercising its rights under the new collective bargaining agreement process with regards to Article 46. As we know, previously, Roger Goodell was judge and jury when it came to this entire process relative to the NFL conduct policy, and if there was a violation deemed to be happening underneath that. And now we have the inclusion of the neutral arbiter prior to that. That being Sue Robinson, determined 6 games. Now the NFL has come out today and said that it will exercise its rights and it will pursue this appeal. What we are looking to find out is, to what degree they are pursuing that, meaning are they going for the full discipline that they were seeking before coming into the hearing and during the hearing, whether it's indefinite suspension of a minimum of a year? Or would they try to do something less than that to perhaps try to mitigate against the NFLPA and or Deshaun Watson from pursuing a lawsuit, which is obviously still within the union's rights and Deshaun Watson's rights? Now, meaning, so for example, you're at 6 games. If you end up pursuing, 2 or 3, does that, prevent you or, give you something to think about with regards to pursuing a lawsuit, especially when you think of the case of Tom Brady, where a lawsuit was pursued. They initially did get a victory in the lower court, and then it came back that obviously, as we know, Tom Brady still served that 4-game suspension. And the reason why it's also something to think about, not just because of the standpoint of the length of time, the process, and all that other stuff, but that what we've seen in previous cases is that judges really don't like to step into these collectively bargained situations. And a lot of times, based on the history, they've gone back and they've looked at the language and said, we might not agree. This is complicated. Sure, there are mitigating circumstances. However, union, this is the language that you agreed to. So you kind of got to think about that. And on the flip side, the NFL, I'm sure, has other owners who will be thinking about the possible arguments that Deshaun Watson's side could potentially pursue, especially in a courtroom where the arbitration record can then become accessible, as it did in the Ezekiel Elliott case. We can all read it, not just the decision, but what gets said, via the entire record or what have you, from the arbitration record and back and forth with the lawsuit. And then potentially there are owners out there who wouldn't want certain things to become, discussed in the public hemisphere with regards to the details and the support of, counter arguments that would go back and forth. So it's a lot of things to think about. I'm just hearing this now, haven't been able to, fully dive into it. We do know that Deshaun Watson practiced today. It is the club's understanding that he is allowed to continue to practice until you have the full adjudication of this appeals process. And then after that, assuming that there is going to be some sort of suspension, Deshaun Watson would get placed on the commissioner's suspension list. And then the question that we've still been trying to just nail down is if that happens immediately relative to this new process, or that happens right at the beginning of the regular season.
All right, Josina, so a lot to unpack there, which is understandable. We're going to work through it. I mean, let's go to the appeal and who could be hearing it, because that is still a little bit unclear, and then when we could see a decision, because it is believed that the NFL would like this to happen sooner rather than later, of course, with the season quickly approaching. So do you know any of the answers as to who could hear this appeal and then when we could see a decision?
I don't know who they would have hear the appeal. I imagine it would be somebody that's within their Rolodex who has heard these, appeals before. If you're looking at the NFL spokesman's quote that he gave to ESPN, he did say, quote, Roger Goodell will determine who will hear the appeal. So that is suggesting that he is passing it off to a designee, at least per that quote, which is within his rights per the language of Article 46. It could be heard by Roger, or it could be heard by someone else. So when we say a designee, that is what we mean. And obviously, the other thing that's within the designee's rights, or the person hearing the appeals rights, is to modify the initial discipline per the ruling of Sue Robinson. And that includes a modification of increase or reduction, or, potentially sticking with what has already been administered. But the NFL has the right to file the appeal, and the designee has the right to modify that appeal via a reduction or an increase.
There are a lot of reports out there that the NFL would be looking at an indefinite suspension. Is that what they initially wanted? And exactly what does that mean?
That means that you cannot, kind of come back until they make you eligible to, for reinstatement by whatever criteria they set for that reinstatement. Initially, the NFL was seeking an indefinite suspension of a minimum of a year. At least that's was what we were hearing per reports going into the hearing and during the hearing. I don't know whether that is what they are still seeking as per what we were just talking about. We talked about the potential disadvantage of doing that because you have to think of the counter move to that being a potential lawsuit and what other things may come out as a result of that. So to answer your question, we don't know specifically if they're sticking with what we knew to be the reported discipline that they were going after before. And that is what we understood going into the hearing and during the hearing.
Justina, you mentioned that Deshaun Watson has been there at Browns training camp, working out with the team. I don't know if you've been on the phone with anybody there or just what the feeling is there at Browns training camp and around him, because, I mean, you would almost feel like you're tiptoeing around. I don't know if the players feel like that right now. Are you hearing anything about what's going on there and the feeling at the Browns training camp?
Well, a couple of things in answering that question. I would say before it was definitely per how we were describing it from our own eyes of being there multiple times leading up to this process, which was the team and Deshaun Watson taking in his business as usual, being optimistic as to what they would hear relative to how cogent they felt their arguments were placed before Sue Robinson and the evidentiary outcome that we saw, which was the 6-game suspension. I would say since the suspension has come out, or Robinson's ruling, there's been a lot of emotional reaction over social media. There's been a lot of emotional reaction over talk radio and talk television. And I think what you're seeing now is people being somewhat cautious with regards to, kind of the sentiment and climate that you're feeling. But at the same time, on the flip side of that, I'm not hearing a difference in the belief and the arguments put forth on the other side with regards to how they feel about it. I mean, if you saw what we talked about on CBS Sports HQ when I was reporting from Spartanburg, South Carolina, a couple of days ago, through sources, I was hearing that Deshaun Watson's side was still very displeased about the result from Sue Robinson, even though it was 6 games, still feeling very adamantly it should be 0 games, and heard through another source someone say that because of it being 6 games and not 0 games, that in their feeling per source that the sentiment was that Sue Robinson was acting more as a mediator as opposed to an arbiter. That was one sentiment. Now, obviously, on the flip side of that, there are people who feel like, she had very strong language in her decision, but still felt like the number of games given didn't match the language in the ruling. And obviously, she deemed, per her own language, that he violated the conduct policy on 3 key elements that she went into. But at the same time, we also know that the NFL conduct policy has a lot of broad language. So it doesn't make it very difficult to be in violation of that conduct policy when there's language in there that says that if you are deemed to be irresponsible, if you're deemed to impact the public confidence in the shield, then you are in violation of the NFL conduct policy. So the bottom line is that a lot of people felt that within Sue Robinson's decision, that the groundwork was set for the NFL to use it as a launching pad to take the move that they did today.
And to add on that just a little bit, I'm curious, there was a lot of outrage, especially on social media when that 6 games came down, and a lot of people pointing to players who had been suspended for things like marijuana or gambling, and putting this in perspective to that. How delicate is this situation right now, and how serious is it for the NFL to look at this and make sure it's the right number of games in regarding Deshaun Watson, because there could be other cases down the line where they look at this as you mentioned, a launching pad?
Well, I think that Sue Robinson pointed out something very problematic in the conduct policy and how it's been used in the past, which was describing the fact that she feels like the NFL is, in simple terms, making it up as it goes along in terms of framing what it deems to be conduct prohibited after the fact. And so it makes it very hard to have anything that is, similar with regards to comparing different cases when, one, obviously cases are separate, but two, there is kind of no framework for understanding what conduct falls into what box beforehand. So all of that makes it, kind of hard to follow, which is basically what she was saying, that I am going off of, the precedents in the past. I'm going off of, her own descriptions, and people took issue with that, of how she was describing, conduct that was violent versus nonviolent. And, she was also going off of what she felt like was the history of recommendations in the past or what was not done in the past. And so the NFL going about this road, essentially ignoring her ruling, but, maybe somewhat following the pathwork that she set forth in the ruling, is still, kind of, doing it again as it goes along, so to speak.
Josina Anderson, we appreciate it. We know you'll be following this closely, as this is still very far from finished. JoJo, thank you so much for joining us here. Regardless of what happens with Deshaun Watson in this case, the NFL season quickly approaching. It returns September 11th. You can watch those games on CBS and stream them on Paramount+.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.